Hey everybody, welcome to another Spoiled Without Spoilers, where we give you just enough of that spoilery goodness to get you excited for this story, but hopefully not ruin it. Today we're going to be looking at another High Republic entry, a middle grade book written by Justina Ireland called Test of Courage. So this is my first time ever reading a Star Wars middle grade novel, and probably to be honest, this is probably my first middle grade novel maybe ever. I didn't read a whole lot as a kid. Oops. This is the second entry into the High Republic series, and I wanted to make sure to read this just to soak up everything the High Republic had to offer. The authors definitely did a good job selling this book, kind of citing it as more of a quick read for adults and a good book for younger kids, but not necessarily a kid's book that you just want to write off. So diving into the book a little bit, we meet a bunch of characters who are all on their way to Starlight Beacon. Things go awry, and a bunch of kids are separated from adults. They then have to kind of find their way out of the situation and back to civilization. So it's a fun little adventure following them. We have a group of about 6 characters that we meet, a few Jedi, a few not. Our main character is a 16-year-old Jedi Knight, who actually is one of the youngest Jedi Knights in the history, at least at that time. We also learn throughout the book that she has this really cool lightsaber that she actually modified herself. She listened to the Force and it kind of called out to her to do this. It's a little unorthodox, but it's very interesting. Kind of gave me some Ezra Bridger sort of unusual lightsaber vibes. So she's tasked with watching over the senator's daughter, who's just a little too smart maybe for her own good. She causes Vernestra quite a few issues, but it's all with good intentions. The senator's daughter also has a droid that watches over her. The droid's pretty interesting because it was a bodyguard droid that was modified to be a nanny. We find out a little bit more about that in the story and why her mother, the senator, is so overprotective. On this journey, we also have an ambassador's son, as well as a Padawan who's not much younger than Vernestra. The two of them go through some pretty heavy stuff in this book, and their stories kind of parallel one another. It's very interesting to see how a normal citizen, as well as a Padawan, kind of have a lot more in common than one might think. We also have 2 members of the Nihil who serve as villains for this novel. We don't get to spend a whole lot of time with them, but it's enough to give kind of an imposing threat for these characters throughout this book. So they're all headed to Starlight Beacon, and on their way there, they get separated from the rest of the adults. So it's kids kind of journeying on their own to find some civilization and to find some safety. They end up running into the 2 Nihil, and a bunch of stuff goes down. Along the way, we get some dark side temptations, as well as some not Force Ghost kind of stuff. So it's a pretty standard adventure, something you'd expect from a book of this reading level. Now the story, while more of a kid's book, definitely still has ties to a lot of what we saw in Light of the Jedi. A lot of the things that we learned in that novel definitely come back around here, so I would recommend reading that book first before diving into this. Now, it wouldn't totally ruin your experience by reading this book first, but I definitely would suggest reading the novel to get a lot of the setup for what's going on in the High Republic, as well as some more looks inside of the villains and the whole overall organization. This book does a good job of continually showing us how the Jedi are a little more in tune with their emotions. They're a little more understanding, and they're a lot less strict than we see them in the prequel era of Star Wars. So when I was reading this book, I definitely felt like this was intended for kids. The writing style was a little more dumbed down, and the story was a little more straightforward. It was definitely a way smaller story than Light of the Jedi was, but it makes sense. We're trying to cram all of this into about 150 pages. It almost felt like it was one of the side stories that might have been included in Light of the Jedi, and then they pulled it out, dumbed down the reading level just a bit, and kind of made it for kids. I know that this book was definitely intended to be its own thing, but it just felt like one of those side stories from that book. You can either see that as a good thing or a bad thing. However, while the writing style might have felt very kid-friendly, there was definitely a lot of dark and weighty themes in this book. Enough that it would actually kind of surprise me sometimes that they would go there in this story. I haven't read a kid's book in a long time, and I don't know what kind of themes they're dealing with in those, but yeah, this was definitely a little darker than I expected. I can definitely see them trying to seed in some of this stuff to draw in more adults to actually pick up this book. Don't write it off just because it's a, quote, kid's book. I finished this in just a few hours. It wasn't that long at all, and it was a quick and fun adventure to just complete in a night. Novels and even young adult books can take kind of a while to get through, but this was such a quick read. It was quick enough to the point where I read the book first, and then I was able to listen to the audiobook right after it. Now, the audiobook also gives it some kid-friendly vibes. The voice actor is not terrible by any stretch of the imagination, but it's no Mark Thompson or Jonathan Davis. She has a very kid-friendly quality to her voice, and I understand why they went with that for a middle grade book. Some of the character voices she used, though, were a little similar, so it was kind of confusing as to who was speaking when, and some of the voices had slight inconsistencies. Not enough to pull me out of the story, but I definitely noticed that they were there. It's not horrible though, so I definitely still recommend listening to the audiobook if you're more of an audiobook person. Speaking of trying to pull in adult readers, they do have a lot of Easter eggs in this book. There's a lot of ties to Light of the Jedi, but there's also prequel, original trilogy, and sequel trilogy nods in this book. Like Light of the Jedi, we have some more family ties to a character that we meet in the original trilogy era comic books. I feel like this is a great way to kind of tie in some of the stuff we know from the current Star Wars era out to the High Republic. It's kind of nice to know that some of these families have been around for quite a long time. There's also ties to things like Galaxy's Edge. It's a nice nod, but it is kind of a little blatant, and it almost does take you out of the book for a minute. Now, the big reason that you'd want to read this book is that we do get a taste of what the Jedi trials are. They don't go super into detail, so don't get too overly excited, but this is a bunch of new information that we really haven't seen much in Star Wars. I feel like they really are teasing us, and we're eventually going to see a full-fledged Jedi Knight trial. I won't give you too many details about the trials, but for the little hints that we got, I definitely think it was worth reading this book. So overall, this is a small, fun, enjoyable story, a very quick read for an adult, but I do think I would have loved this when I was a kid, if I actually read books. However, I'm just not in love with this book like I was for Light of the Jedi, or some of the other novels that we've gotten in Star Wars. Don't get me wrong, I would be interested in seeing these characters come back again, and Justina Ireland is actually writing a young adult book, which I believe is based around our main Jedi in this story. I'm definitely excited for that, as young adult books tend to be a nice middle ground between a middle grade book like this and a hefty novel like Light of the Jedi. Now, I would recommend picking up this book if you really love Light of the Jedi and you want a little more of the High Republic. If you didn't like Light of the Jedi though, this is a book that you could skip over, and I'd suggest waiting for Claudia Gray's first High Republic novel to come out. So thank you guys for checking out our Test of Courage review. If you like these spoiled without spoiler reviews, make sure to give us a like down below. As well, if you want to see more of these videos, or if you want to experience our Canon timeline binge, make sure to subscribe to our channel. May the spires keep you, and may the Force be with you.